Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag and drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. Andy, I think this trailer for Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, I think today's me, sitting in a theater in, let's say, early 1984, watching this trailer, I would have been right pissed.
This is one that they give up quite a bit. And it's interesting because listening to good old Harve Bennett talking about it.
Is he good old now? Is that where we are?
We've
moved on to good old.
Exactly.
Harve. Okay,
yeah.
good. All
Next
right.
week it'll be, Harve and me. And
Harve and me. Okay, go on.
And then it'll be Uncle Harve. And
Uncle Harve, and then crazy Uncle Harve.
Crazy Uncle Harve. Well, it gets to that point by Star Trek V, so maybe it will be. I don't even remember where I was going with that. Oh, no, but he talked about how he and Leonard, they were editing the film and the studio showed them the trailer. And he, in his mind, when he was kind of coming up with the idea for the script, he's like, the Enterprise, the destruction of the Enterprise, that's going to be a huge thing. It's going to be kind of the big pivotal moment toward the end of the film. And that's where he started writing the script and he worked backward from there. And when they saw the trailer, it's like they both were so upset at Paramount because they're like, you guys are giving everything away. And they fought and fought, but Paramount won out. And I guess they were just really kind of irritated that Paramount went that route with the trailer.
It reads to me very much like Paramount didn't get it.
Yeah, right.
You know, like at this point, now the Enterprise has been destroyed so many times, it's sort of lost its luster. Because we already knew what was going to happen with Spock. Like any right-thinking moviegoer and Star Trek fan, by this point, got it that we were going to see Spock again. There's no way you have a movie called The Search for Spock and they're not going to give up the fact that we're going to see Spock. So,
although that'd be pretty funny.
It would.
Well, I guess we didn't find him. Let's go home.
Well, that was. Did I ever tell you about my giant squid viewing experience?
I don't.
There was a show. It was the Search for the Giant Squid from Jacques Cousteau's. It was one of his last things, the legendary Search for the Giant Squid. And after 2 hours, I devoted my life to this thing. They never find it. They never find the Search for the Giant Squid. And I kind of feel like that might have actually been a better movie if they didn't find Spock.
That was very funny. Yeah.
Totally
that. Or the it's the same thing with what's his name?
Yeah.
And Capone's.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mustached guy. Yeah, absolutely. The opening Capone's vault. So in this case, I think, they actually, and the script is written as such to make the destruction of the Enterprise a significant emotional beat, right? It is a significant peak in the film. And they just gave it up in the trailer. And I think that was a really lousy choice.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate, and I mean, my guess is it was that the studio did decide. Well, it's the search for Spock. We can't ever reveal anything about Spock, and I mean, exactly like you just said, they went the other route, and they ended up giving up a lot of the stuff that really is kind of the emotional peaks.
Yeah,
for the film.
And the caper aspect of it, the whole fact that it's such a, the stuff that in the first half hour sets up the great caper of stealing the ship, and I think they gave up so much of that that I just think they didn't have to. So for me, the trailer's a wash. I wasn't crazy about it.
I will say it's very funny with the quick cut that they have to Christopher Lloyd as the Klingon screaming fire. In Klingonese, it really just sounds like he's cursing at the screen, and I guess that they can get away with that because he's technically speaking Klingon, but it doesn't sound that way. It sounds like you don't want your children to be hearing what he's screaming at that particular moment. And it's not subtitled, which makes it even funnier.
It is. It really is. Star Trek, as they say, it's always been a great way to get kids invested in foreign languages.
All that they've loved. All that they've fought for, all that they've stood for, will now be put to the test. Star Trek III, The Search for Spock.
The word, sir? The word is no. I am therefore going anyway.
You do this, you'll never sit in the captain's chair again.
Engage auto systems. Clear all moorings.
Cleared, sir.
1/4 impulse power.
Someone is stealing the Enterprise. Warp speed.
Klingon bird bracer. She's arming torpedoes.
Shields up.
The shield's non-responsive.
Fuck! We're a sitting duck.
Join us on this, the final voyage of the Starship Enterprise. Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. The adventure continues.
This is The Next Reel, everybody. I'm Pete Wright, and that there's Andy Nelson.
May I join your mind?
Kerplach! We spoil movies. Tonight on the show, Leonard Nimoy ditches the ears and dons the beret as director of 1984's Star Trek III, The Search for Himself. Before we get that, you should learn more about us at thenextreel.com. Subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, or follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Next Reel.
And if you're a regular listener of the show and you're interested in supporting our ongoing work investigating great film, please consider a regular donation through our Patreon page at patreon.com/thenextreel.
I will say this about Star Trek III, Andy. The ships look really good.
Oh, they do. Yes, indeed.
They really do. So the fit and finish largely of the ships are a dramatic improvement over the last. film. I think they look great.
Some of that is because we have a bird of prey, and I mean that is just such a fantastic ship to be looking at all the time. It's like gorgeous, and I love it, always have, and I think that it just gave such a nice difference between the two ships. I mean, the last one, it was two Federation starships kind of at war, and there was enough of a difference between the two, but it also wasn't as interesting because it's just like, two starships shooting at each other.
Totally.
This was fun to see. Plus, there's actually a lot of ships that kind of get taken down in this one. At least, I mean, compared to last time.
Yeah, right. The Bird of Prey is such an iconic ship, and it looks so, obviously they do make the point in the film of just how, why is she just sitting there? We're outgunned 10-1, right? Of the Enterprise versus the Bird of Prey in this film. But it looks like it just really captures such a menacing perspective. And this was, we should step back just a little bit. This is essentially the cinematic introduction of the Klingons. I mean, we see a little bit of the Klingons in Star Trek, in Star Trek 1, in the very open, but that's not largely a Klingon movie. They're token Klingons. But for the first time having the cinematic experience with the Klingons, that ship, when we first see that ship in the very opening sequence of the film, it is menacing and beautiful.
Yeah, the way it appears right there over that little, I can't remember what that vessel is, just kind of the scavenger's vessel. When it kind of appears over that, it's like, wow, because it's cloaked, and then it appears out of the out of that cloaking shield that it has, and it's so cool, and it's so big compared to that little ship. It's really just fantastic and so threatening. You're right.
And it is, in fact, this is the introduction of the Bird of Prey. This is the first time we see it. The Bird of Prey class was introduced for this movie, and it was it's seen in 5 subsequent films. It's throughout the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. It's all over the place.
And it's fun to see the just kind of looking at the different ILM people who kind of came up with it, and looking at kind of their sketches and everything, and seeing how they kind of evolved that whole idea. And they talked about they had pictures of different birds in flight, and then they had a picture of like just a muscle man flexing, and the guy was like, one of the people's like, I want it to look like this, where his arms are down, and they wanted to keep the big deltoids on him and everything. And so they really kind of incorporated a lot of interesting little things to kind of make that kind of iconic shape. It's pretty cool.
It is very cool. The cloaking device too. I mean, did that not blow your mind a little bit? Do you remember your experience first seeing this movie and watching the film come out of cloak?
Well, what's funny about this movie is I never saw this until I think it was the same marathon when I saw the first one.
What? Wait. What?
That's true. Somehow I skipped over this. I just went from 2 to 4.
What? Andy,
well,
what?
Because I knew, I'm like, well, they're gonna.
Andy, wait
find
a minute.
Spock.
It's a trilogy, man.
I get it.
You skipped the empire of this trilogy?
Well, I don't know if I'd call it the empire of this trilogy, but yes.
I'm just trying to be generous, man. Come on.
I skipped. I would say the Matrix Revolutions of this trilogy. Is that the second one?
Oh, I think it wasn't it Reloaded.
Reloaded. That's right.
Yeah, Reloaded was second. Revolutions was the
reconstituted.
Yeah. Matrix reconstituted. Yes. Wow. That stuns me that you would have let that happen, even circa 1984. Like, you're pretty on top of things.
Well, I wasn't that on top of things with Star Trek. Like, I wasn't paying attention to that sort of stuff. Yeah. And I heard from people that I knew who had seen it that, yeah, they find him. And so I was like, okay. And I guess I didn't have much more stake in the game to rush out and see it. And I heard it wasn't very good. And so it wasn't something that I felt obligated to watch.
Okay. Well, I get that. And I will say my memory of it, this cloaking thing, That was a big deal, seeing the cloaking thing on screen, and I think they did it really, really well. And when I was seeing it as a young teenager, it was mind blowing watching that on the big screen. I thought it was just beautiful, and the fact that this also introduces the cloaking device as a Klingon bit of technology, I think is really fascinating. And so I think it adds to the lore of Star Trek, this film, in a lot of ways that I think are celebrated in other films, even though the sum of all of those things in this film ends up being not that great.
Yeah, that's kind of the unfortunate thing about the movie, is that there's interesting ideas going on in here, but I just feel like if they had actually brought in some other writers to really kind of put it all together, it could have worked a lot better. Unfortunately, as it was, I just think that it was not something that Harve Bennett really. I don't know. I guess it's just one of those things. It's like, sure, they asked you to write it, but that doesn't mean you as the producer should do that. Look at what's smartest for the project and maybe hire an actual writer to do the writing.
I like to think, my inner revisionist historian likes to think that, like, I excuse this film as a great example of groupthink. That, somehow it came around that Harve should write the script. He writes it in 6 weeks. They give it to Leonard Nimoy. He hadn't directed anything, and to hear, Shatner tell the story, Nimoy calls Shatner and says, "I don't know how to direct, but I'm going to direct. And I'm going to direct the next film." And Shatner says, "Okay, come over to my show. I'm doing the way he says it, I'm doing a police show."
Right.
He says, and he puts Leonard behind, allows him to direct a sequence in this show, I think uncredited, and teaches him, as Shatner says, everything he knows. I teach him everything he knows. And then he goes on to Star Trek 3 and directs me, and he was my acolyte. He says, "He was my acolyte, Andy. My kingdom for somebody to say that about me. One day." He says, "Leonard owes me more than he has ever admitted for teaching him everything I know about directing for Star Trek 3. And that is what is on screen on this film. And so back to this whole groupthink thing. Here we have Leonard Nimoy, who's never directed anything and maybe was directing this script and didn't quite have the authority to say, this is not that great. This is just sort of bouncing around. This is ultimately a story that moves some of the interesting technology forward, some of the interesting canon elements forward, but is ultimately an inconsequential story.
Well, except I don't know if he felt that. Like, listening to Nimoy talk about it, he seemed to really click with the story. And I think that their focus was on friendship, like, hearing him talk about the themes and stuff, the themes of friendship and everything come forward. I definitely see that, but does it make sense in the bigger picture and everything? And for me, the struggle I have is we just watched this brilliant film where you have, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or of the one. And Spock sacrifices himself. And then here they flip that and they say the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many, and they kind of, steal the Enterprise and, risk their careers just to go save the one person. Mm-hmm. And yes, I get it. It's for friendship and all that. And I understand that that's kind of the theme that they were trying to push with this. But at the same time, it's like, I feel like you just kind of ruined the message that you were trying to say, and that you had it kind of laid out so beautifully in the previous film. And all of a sudden it's like, screw that. Let's just, now we're going to be greedy. And then the other thing that frustrates me is we get to the end of the film and they get to, to this big ceremony that Bones and Spock have to go through to transfer his Katra back from Bones's brain into Spock's brain. And they warn him. They say, there is great danger here and you might die. And it's like, well, then what is the point of this whole mission that we're on here? If he's going to die, they came here to save Spock, but now they're going to kill McCoy just to do it? It's like, what was the point of all of this?
Totally.
I got so mad.
Well, I get mad. I think I in my initial comments of the very first movie 3 weeks ago, well, I said one of the things that I really like about Star Trek in general is that when there is a giant problem, it's solved through, maybe fantastically, but it's solved through a technological solution, a practical solution, a military or a strategic solution. And in this film, the entire arc of the narrative is built on an incredibly risky ancient ritual practiced by a race of alien that has long shunned exactly that kind of ritual, right? It relies on the mystical, like the Force, and that's a thing that I don't feel like I feel like it shakes an angry stick at what is Star Trek, and it's really frustrating. It's a frustrating way, I think, to make this happen. It feels like an excuse to get Spock back into the series after a well-earned death. And as much as I'm glad he's back for later movies, I'm sure I'm just generally unsatisfied by how they did it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very frustrating way to kind of put this story together. And, another frustration is like the Spock is only alive because of this crazy Genesis planet that's going awry, and the whole thing is kind of exploding and falling apart and aging way too quickly and collapsing, basically.
Yeah, right.
Aside from the fact that the whole idea of Genesis is nonsense, and one of the least scientific things I think that I've seen on Star Trek. I just don't understand the whole the way that Spock ages. He ages so fast. I mean, we see him over the course of, I don't know how long they're on the planet, but a couple days, maybe. And he goes from a 9-year-old or whatever to Spock at, as old as he was on the show. But then they take him off and he stops aging. And I'm like, well, is that because he was on the planet he was aging? Wouldn't it be in his genes now? And
New Savick said that, right? I mean, and New Savick actually did tell us, we have to get him off the planet. And the implication is because the planet is affecting him this way. And she also goes on to imply that he is affecting the planet. I don't get it. I'm not saying I get it, but New Savick seemed to have have her head around it. The problem I have with that is actually not his aging. It's how does the body of old Spock, right? The dead body of old Spock. They put him in this photon torpedo tube, and what? He hits the Genesis planet, and Benjamin Buttons back to 9, and then starts aging again? What the hell is that all about?
Right, exactly. It's just so much of it is just nonsense, and it's just so fantastical and so hard to buy into, and it really frustrates me.
It really does. It really does. And I've grown through this movie to really despise the Genesis planet. I just hate it. I hate cactuses with snow on them. I hate the ring round the Genesis planet conversation that New Savick and David have. Now we're in the eastern quadrant and there's snow in the desert and now we're going to the mountains. And you know what I mean? It is such terrible writing, that sequence, to introduce us to the Genesis planet, that eventually the Genesis planet loses all meaning.
Again, going back to the idea of Star Trek kind of having a better grounding in science, it's like you can't just shoot this Genesis missile at any rock in space and turn it into a living and breathing planet. It's like there are a lot of requirements, like how far it is from a source like a sun that can actually warm it and give it its heat so that it can grow all of this stuff. And here we've got this planet, God only knows where it is, but it's like, and then the seasons, it's like, why is it snowing all of a sudden in the tropical quarter? Is it how does that tie into anything? I don't know. It's just very frustrating.
But see, I wonder, because I also have a problem with that. I think it's silly. It's a narrative excuse, and it always has been. But why did we not poke such holes in it in Star Trek 2? It was stupid then too.
It was stupid then too, and but I think we get so little of it. I mean, we see the cave, we get a sense of what they're doing, but you don't have a good sense of how long it took to make that cave.
Mm-hmm.
At the very end of the film, when they actually do make it, I don't know. I guess you're just in such an emotionally heightened moment because of Spock's recent death that. You just kind of go along with it and just kind of, okay, now there's the planet here.
Well, and I would just to pile on that point, I think that because so much of Star Trek II works without the Genesis planet, it could have been just a ridiculously powerful weapon. It could have been something else. It really could have just been the terrorist story, and because of that, we don't stop to think too hard about it. But in this film, they anchor the entire story around this foundational logic that is faulty. And because they force you to think about it, because if you don't think about it, you can't engage with the story at all. When they open the door to asking these questions, this is kind of what you get.
It's just frustrating because I don't know, after having such an incredible experience with Star Trek II, and knowing that this flows directly from that, you really want it to be kind of at that same level. And it just ends up falling so flat. I mean, it's got Klingons speaking Klingon. So, I mean, there are some cool elements.
It's got Klingons speaking Klingons. I every time I look at the Klingons, it's great. Oh, there's Klingons, but why these Klingons?
Why like these people, like Christopher Lloyd?
Like Christopher Lloyd. And I think there are people, I don't know if this is a binary thing, and I can't wait to hear what you think of Christopher Lloyd, because I have a real problem with Christopher Lloyd. I think he is an incredibly talented actor, and to hear Leonard Nimoy talk about him as a chameleon, that he can totally do it, like it's going to be great. That's all well and good, but I never saw him as anything other than Christopher Lloyd, and I couldn't get through that. It was Christopher Lloyd with a forehead pasted on, and the fact that they didn't do the teeth, that other Klingons had the teeth, but and you actually exemplify this. You grabbed the stills for our deep scene dive today, and if you look at the still of him yelling, you actually see Christopher Lloyd's dental work. Like it just those little things, when you get the close up of his fillings. I can't get out of the fact that it's Christopher Lloyd and not a Klingon. I was never able to engage there. What about you? I mean, did you buy him?
No, I have a really hard time. And it's funny. It's difficult, like trying to put myself back into 1984 brain, looking at this before Back to the Future, because that was obviously 1 year later, such an iconic character created by Christopher Lloyd in Doc Brown. And before that, I don't know if there's really anything with Christopher Lloyd that I would have known him from.
Not Taxi.
I never watched Taxi.
My parents were such huge Taxi fans. What I can't remember is when I would have watched Taxi, because I know I was watching it young, but maybe not this young. Was it still on? I don't actually remember when it was on and versus when it was in syndication already.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was the early 80s, so it might have been right before this. It might have been over right before this. But regardless, I certainly didn't see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. By the time I saw this, I had seen a lot of other Christopher Lloyd stuff, and I had a very specific idea of who he was in my head. And it could be just because of that I've never been able to buy Christopher Lloyd as this particular character. I just don't see it. There's something a little different about him as an actor. And I mean, I agree. He's a brilliant actor. He can be a chameleon, certainly. But something about him as a Klingon, I just kind of struggle with.
That's a real challenge. He does have a dog.
He does.
We get a Klingon dog. Do you have trouble with the way they did the language, the choices they made around the language? I do. The consistency of the language, I have some real trouble with.
Yeah, absolutely. I could never figure out why the Klingons were speaking English, because they speak Klingonese so often But then they randomly start speaking English. And why would they speak English at any time except when they're interacting with the Federation starships? And that really frustrated me, especially listening to the guy who created the language and just how, I mean, it was really just magical hearing him talk about how he came up with it. And just, I mean, he's really nerdy linguist, and he really devised this, like, kind of the foundations for this full language that we now have. And to know that they had it there and they just didn't take it that much of a step further and really kind of stick with it.
When it switches back and forth in mid-sentence, I have real trouble with it. It's just they make the choice. But the same thing happens with weirdly with Chekhov and this one little bit. Chekhov turns around and to Scotty, who is not Russian, Chekhov turns around and speaks Russian to him. What is that all about?
All I could figure out was like it's some Russian joke that he was telling or something, and it's just like I was like, maybe he's told that to Scotty before and Scotty knows it. Like c'est la vie, sort of like an expression that he uses a lot around the ship.
Yeah, it's just
I don't know.
If that's the case, it just didn't play.
It was very frustrating. I mean, there were a lot of script elements that they threw in here. They have when we don't see McCoy on screen, and we know that he has Spock's Katra in him. There are a few moments where we hear him speak, but it's clearly Spock's voice, and everyone turns and looks at him, and he's like, "What?" And kind of that whole thing. I mean, there are moments like that. I'm like, God, do they really need to go there? Because I don't know. It just kind of ends up becoming really silly and very frustrating, especially when it's so interesting. Like when Kirk walks into Spock's room early on and finds McCoy sitting there in the shadows, kind of possessed almost by Spock's ghost. I mean, that was an incredibly effective scene. I really enjoyed that, only to have it diminished by doing these little cheap gags.
Did I mention how good the ships looked?
Beautiful ships.
And I also the shuttle or the shipyard, right? When they go to the station, the reveal of the station is particularly beautiful. I'm trying to find the things that just need to be celebrated.
I also loved that. I really appreciated the moment when it's coming into the space dock. And you see it kind of fly past that window, and everybody kind of stands up and looks at it. It's like it was kind of a really powerful moment to see the Enterprise coming in. She's got all of her burns and
totally.
charred, body from her battles with Khan. It's fantastic that that Yeoman Rand is in the group.
I know.
Watching, I love how they just pepper her in wherever they get a chance, because we got to get Rand back in here.
And she had a new rank, right? I mean, she had been promoted clearly.
Yes.
In a different uniform, and in fact, I think the entire opening sequence, once they get to the station, I actually like. I like as soon as they get to the administrivia of it, of like, oh no, she's being decommissioned. Everybody's going off to their own places. You need to find your way around. I think the breakout is fun. What's the word, Admiral? The word is no. I am therefore going anyway. Which I love. I think all that stuff is really, it's fun, and it's the kind of stuff I want out of Star Trek. The breakout of the Enterprise I love, and I think it's a fun bit of frivolity when the Excelsior is sabotaged. All of that stuff is fun. So we get this 15 or 20 minute bit on the space station that ends up working for me.
I think so too. There's a lot of great bits. I've been laughing before the show with you about the, I guess, cousins that we found between the Star Trek and Star Wars universes, between the strange little alien guy that McCoy as Spock talks to, trying to commission a ship, who looks awfully like the Deveronian, kind of the devil man in the cantina in Star Wars. Minus the horns, and add a few extra little hippie frills on them, and I swear it's the same guy.
I want to compliment you as a student of Star Wars lore that you just dropped. Deveronian is quite impressive.
Damn right. Well, I had to look it up, but I'm trying to make myself sound more impressive.
You didn't even have to give that up, Andy. I was impressed anyway.
Oh well, thank you,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But but also there is a bit in there that I get frustrated with. It's when what's his name? The Morrow. I think it's the guy who's kind of in charge of everything there at the station. He's talking to Kirk, and Kirk is talking to him in the bar about, hey, I need to do this. I need to take the Enterprise, go back to Genesis, and save Spock. And the guy's like, no, too bad. The council's not going to let you do that. All that sort of stuff. And then he has this line it's a line that really frustrated me when I heard it. He says, Jim, your life and your career stand for rationality, not intellectual chaos. Keep up this emotional behavior and you'll lose everything. And I was just like, I don't know. I felt like he didn't really know Jim because he seems so irrational at times and full of that intellectual chaos. And I mean, he has that emotional behavior. He's obviously kind of the opposite of Spock as we see, but I'm just like, I don't know. Maybe Jim just kind of shows him the business side of him, and he doesn't really get to see him in action out in the field. But no, I feel like we've seen that a lot in the show.
We totally have. You're absolutely right to bring that up, too. I did not make that connection, but you're so right. In fact, so much of what this film, I think, purports to do is to show us a Captain Kirk who has become totally unhinged because he doesn't have Spock to rely on. If Spock was around and it was anyone else that Kirk was close to, do you think Spock would have said, oh, Captain, let's go ahead and steal a spaceship and go get... I support that, Captain. No, of course not, because it's ridiculous. That's what this film could have shown us, and I think we see hints of it, that he is, in fact, this is the Kirk. This could have been the raw, unfiltered Captain Kirk that has... no support. He's missing, arguably 1.5 of his key, of the key sort of trio, because he certainly doesn't have. He has the sarcastic side of Bones. Everything else in Bones is all shaken up,
right? Exactly.
As a result of all this. So I think that's a really good point, and it's not great. I'm never going to look at that scene again the same way. You've just damaged the film even more for me.
Well, that's what I'm here for.
Okay. What else is important to us about the history of the film? What else did you learn?
Something that I think is interesting. I don't know about the history, but it's an interesting thing that we haven't talked about at all in Star Trek yet, but it's an interesting show and just a franchise because it has taken the idea of voiceover that sometimes just gets, a lot of people like, oh, never use voiceover. It's just a cheap writer's tool. But it's become so kind of connected to this just franchise as the captain's log, as a chance for the captain to kind of talk a little bit. And I find that it's interesting listening to the way that they use it in the films. It's not often in the films so much, at least at this point. But it's been nice seeing kind of how they use it and when, and just it's little bits to kind of catch you up a little bit, a little expositional. But this one, I liked how in this one it actually kind of was a little heavier. It was like Kirk and his emotions about Spock and how the I can't remember what he says. Like there's that great line right at the beginning. He's talking about how they dropped off all the trainees and it feels like, parents at home waiting for their kids who are all gone or something like that.
Right. Which is lovely.
Yeah, it's really well written. It's really touching. And I just think in context of the captain's log and kind of that expositional narration that they use it for, it was nice to just kind of get a sense that it was actually a little different this time.
It's something I think in Star Trek that is easy to forgive, partially because it comes, from the show. It was such an element of the show to move the show forward cheaply, to move the narrative forward without having to create an effect, or a new set. But in this case, I think it works really well. And I think starting here, it only gets more and more serious. We have some captain's log in the next film, even though there's that much more sort of frivolity. But, some of the best captain's log work it comes up in Star Trek, the Undiscovered Country, and it becomes a key part of the narrative of the mystery, right, of the story, which I can't wait to talk about. I'll never forgive them for the death of my son. which is just such a powerful moment. And that really starts, that narrative, I think, starts right here, which is, again, it's another example of a rock thrown in the Star Trek pond, the ripples of which pay off, a decade later. It ends up being very powerful.
I wish that the moment was more powerful for me.
Right. Ugh.
And that's what's so frustrating is it's like,
frustrating.
it's a really great, I love Shatner's reaction when he kind of stumbles and falls. It just kind of, that whole bit, I think, was just so beautiful and touching. Unfortunately, it's just like, we never get a sense of any relationship built from this. Between the second and third films, it's like he's known his son for all of a month or whatever. And I get it. It still is painful, but I just never got a sense that there was that relationship built between them.
So Harve Bennett says that coming out of Star Trek II, the film was performing so well, he says this was the fastest green light for a sequel I've ever experienced. Get to work on Star Trek.
Yeah, God love that. And then they brought, I can't remember how the idea of Nimoy directing came up, but I thought it was funny that there all this talk back and forth about him directing, and then Michael Eisner, who was the head of Paramount at the time, was just like, oh no, we don't want you to direct because you didn't want to be any more Star Trek films, and you had it in your contract written that you were out, that you had to be killed in Star Trek 2 because you wanted out of this franchise. And Nimoy had to go talk to him. He's like, no, I never had that in my contract. I'm happy to be a part of the franchise, and had to talk him down basically so that he would be able to direct it after all.
The way Shatner tells it,
which is always the best. Anytime Shatner is telling these stories, it's really
the Shatner perspectives are my favorite ones. They really are, because in this case, and that's why I want to bring it up, the way Shatner tells the story is like, Leonard went to the studio and said, "You want me back in this? I've got to direct." Right, he's holding a gun to their head. It was everything has such drama. He tells the story of the Paramount fire. The way Shatner tells it, he's walking along set. He had one day left to shoot before he had to get back to his police series, which was on hiatus. And he walks through the door, and there's a fire, and the place is on fire. And I have to, and he goes in and has to do something heroic. And he says, and then I hear the sirens, and I come out of the smoke, and I saluted to the fire department. And I said, It's all yours. I emerged blackened.
The best was him talking about how he's just like, I didn't even think about, I've got to save somebody. I've got to, make sure nobody's hurt. I've got to save the studio. All I could think about is, if this burns down and puts the production behind by a day, then it's going to affect my show, and I can't let it do that. I've got to stop. Oh, Shatner. Did I ever tell you I worked with him once?
You did not, Andy. How do you keep that from me?
I don't know. It was on a pilot for a cooking show, and he was the guest chef for an episode. Yes, it was called Cooking's a Drag, and it was a drag queen host, and he was our first guest, and it was very funny. He made mint juleps.
That's pretty recent, right?
It's been a while now. We probably did that like 10 years ago or something.
When do you not work on stuff that involves booze? It feels like you've been sending, as an aside, I just, pardon me, listeners, you send me stuff to watch of yours, stuff that you're actively working. It's all about booze. Have you been just working? Is that all you do anymore? Sheriff Joe Arpaio and booze?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Do we want to go into our deep scene dive, Andy?
Deep scene dive.
We've got a collection of scenes. It's a sequence.
It is a sequence. It's really deep sequence dive.
Deep sequence. As long as it doesn't change the acronym DSD, Andy. If you're looking at the script in the show notes, it would be DSD 201 to 213. It's right about 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 7 seconds through 1 hour, 16 minutes, and 6 seconds. Do you want to set it up?
It's a nice little 5-minute chunk of time. So the Enterprise has just arrived at Genesis. They have found the Klingon bird of prey, we have this fantastically prescient Kirk who is able to pinpoint it in the blackness of space. He can pinpoint the variations of starlight so that he knows exactly where the bird of prey is. So when it uncloaks, they can shoot at it before it shoots at them, which I thought was fantastic, actually. I just loved that about him. And so there's this little brief shoot 'em out between the two of them. They all kind of stop for a sec as they kind of try to gauge what the other's doing, and then they talk, and the Klingon team reveals that they actually have people on the planet who have prisoners, and they want the Enterprise because now their ship is damaged, and they are going to take the Enterprise and get the information about Genesis, and they are going to kill someone on the planet just to show that they mean it. And that is the moment they kill Kirk's son, David. And we start our sequence right after that, as Christopher Lloyd's character gives them a 2-minute time limit before they have to or he's going to beam his people over to their ship so they can take it. And we start there.
I love the look of this sequence, and I think it starts with the Enterprise. It is damaged. We've got a reverse shot, or we got a shot looking. It's this typical sort of from the view screen shot where we see the helmsman and the weapons center, and then Kirk's chair in the center. They're all facing backward, and Kirk is kind of holding on to Bones' arm. And I should add, you can look at all of the images that represent this sequence on the website, thenextreel.com, or you can jump over to Facebook. We're creating galleries of all these images on our Facebook page, and so you can jump in and actually look at the images as we're doing this. We've got a slew of them that represent the shot here. And I just love the look of it. The smoke, the lights, the red gels, the blue keys, it looks really good. And I think it does a great job from the production design of just sort of, really keying in on the emotional elements of the ship. It's a look at the ship that we don't usually see.
It's smoky, it's dark, it's mysterious, it's going into self-destruct mode. And so it's got this extra tension. And I love that, like the camera work, you start getting the camera work is very basic as far as just kind of, panning with characters as they're moving by and stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of the crux of any of the movement is it's led by characters.
Cinematography by Charles Correll.
Right. And but the lighting, all of that element of the cinematography gives a really heightened emotional strength to it. Plus you have some nice slow dolly moves, particularly nice dolly moves coming in on Kirk's face as he, Chekhov, and Scotty are entering their destruct codes into the system, and the camera just slowly creeps in on Kirk's face as the thing goes until finally, after it starts, you get this great just close up of his face as he's looking at the screen, and then they all head out of the room and run to get beamed down to the planet. But I also thought it was interesting as the sequence kind of went, we started getting like the camera angles started getting like really low, and I think it kind of starts when we're kind of always, when we're in the bridges of both ships, we're always a little below the captain anyway. They're always kind of sitting kind of above us.
Right.
But once they kind of set the self-destruct and run out, like all of a sudden the camera's like in a hallway and it's really low. It's like knee level, and it looks at them as they looks up at them as they run by. And it keeps staying really low with people. When Krug's people come onto the ship, the camera's low with them as they're walking around. It always kind of maintains this kind of low angle look, which usually gives people more power when you have kind of a lower angle looking up at somebody. So I wasn't quite sure what the goal there was, other than it does kind of add to some of the tension because you've got a lot of powerful looking people kind of running around on screen here.
Running down the hall and those quick cuts from corridor to corridor, and then seeing it play out in reverse when the other team gets there. I think you're right. It just sort of adds to that tension. The one thing that I think about when I look at this sequence, that the set of stills that we pulled in particular, I think highlight this, is how much I wish we had just a little bit more camera variety on Krug's angle, right? I mean, we get pretty much the lockdown camera from the front right, looking up at him in his throne, and it is varying degrees of sort of zoom on him, and very rare that we end up with something. I mean, there's one shot that's kind of a reverse angle where you see behind him, but there is just I get the sense that they just didn't have enough of the set built, for the Klingon interiors, because you just don't get a lot of Klingon interior. My challenge with that is they have given us such a tasty treat in the exterior of the Warbird. I find that a miss. I want to see more of the inside of the ship. I'd be more interested in greater variety of the Klingon experience.
Well, and that could have just done with some of the blocking, like instead of having him just sitting in his chair the whole time.
Yeah.
Have him pacing or something. But yeah, I mean, you lose a lot of power for this powerful character when he's just kind of stuck sitting in his chair pushing his little button the whole time.
Right. Oh, boy, he pushes that button a lot. You're right.
It's the one time that his shots get pretty interesting is when he realizes that the ship's about to blow up and he stands up and screams. You get kind of just a more interesting, closer close-up of him as he stands up and screams. That's where you see his fillings. But at the same time, that for me also is kind of the weirdest lighting behind him, because it's like his head he's got that perfectly framed behind or in front of the roof of their bridge, and it's like this hot pink and purple, and it's like I don't know, for me that really kind of took me out. I mean, it's such a quick shot, but I'm like, It
looks like it's like a roller disco.
Disco room. Yeah. Exactly.
That's exactly what it is. And you're right. And a part of it may be, I don't know, could there be a transfer issue here? Like that pink, it doesn't look as much like Red Alert. It looks a little bit Pink Alert.
It is. But I mean, I think that I don't think it's a transfer issue unless they just mistransferred it. But they might have been trying to delineate the difference between the red on the Enterprise. I'm not sure, but I don't recall. Was it that pink when they are? I think it was actually. Now that I'm scrolling around, no, it wasn't. I was looking for when they were meeting with the Klingon lady earlier to get the Genesis plans. She's the one who's kind of in a. Oh no! It still is pink and purple over his head.
Yeah.
And then it's green. Actually, all of his people around him are working with green monitors.
Oh, that's interesting.
A very odd mix of colors in there. But it's just kind of a funky little thing. I will say that the part of this sequence that we picked that is the real highlight for me is the Enterprise's destruction. The exteriors, like all those beautiful models, starting with the top dome as it explodes and starts kind of plummeting toward the planet. Then you get that fantastic like crackling as the skin is all like burning off, and you see the classic NCC 1701 and USS Enterprise is kind of burning away, and then the big explosion of the disk, and then just kind of the way that it just kind of crashes down into the atmosphere and burns up. I mean, it's beautiful, beautiful model work and pyrotechnics, blue screen, everything that ILM was doing here really is, I think, just top notch. Just work. It's wonderful.
I do too. I find that sequence, particularly when you see the NCC 1701 just shred in fire, is one of the most emotionally like powerful moments of the sequence of the film for me, because it's another thing I thought that was completely sacrosanct. Like you just don't blow up the Enterprise. That is a thing
like
that
blowing
will
up Millennium
never.
Falcon, right?
Right. It's exactly, that is exactly what it is. You just don't blow up the Millennium Falcon. God, they're gonna blow up the Millennium Falcon now. Now I am just sure of it. Now that you put it out there, we're going to lose the Millennium Falcon in this movie, and then we're going to get to be all pissed off when the Han Solo movie comes around and we get to see the Millennium Falcon built. We're like, oh, I have to shoehorn the. Ugh, we're going to find so many reasons to be upset.
Oh, first world problems with films. Gotta love it.
It's sort of distracting anyway. I find those really powerful sequences, and thank goodness they are. The sequence right after the film is just shot 47 of 55, where we pull back and we see a wider shot of the Enterprise now as it's really being kind of pulled apart, and a little bit more of the fire is kind of engulfing it, and it's just. I'm just looking at it. I set it as my desktop wallpaper. I find it just kind of takes my breath away.
This sequence also, I think, is incredibly helped out by just a really beautiful track by James Horner, who returned to compose for this film, continuing his themes that he had started really developing in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And notably, I think because this story really focuses on the search for Spock, the Vulcan themes that he started back in that previous film really developed so nicely here. I mean, it's not as good a score as the second one, but I do enjoy how he kind of continued and developed it. I wish he was able to continue with Star Trek IV, but the studio really wanted him to continue it, which was smart of them. And Leonard Nimoy, as a first-time director, really didn't have much say, even though he really wanted his buddy Leonard Rosenman to do it. He'll get his wish on the next one, and I can't wait to talk about that one. I do have to point out, though, with James Horner, I kind of made a bungle talking about him last week with Star Trek. When I mentioned that that he didn't take any of the themes from either Alexander Courage or Jerry Goldsmith, and lo and behold, he really did. I think he
and not a little bit either.
No, there were quite a few, and I had not had it playing recently. I hadn't been reading about it, but yeah, I think it said there are 6 cues that he integrated elements from those other scores into. I'm like, so yeah, I guess there's quite a bit of their music all scattered through Star Trek II. So there's my apology.
Good correction, Andy. Good correction. Not just a correction. We don't apologize, Andy. We don't have hashtag no apologies.
That's right.
Hashtag fake Horner. Is there anything in this film that really you feel showcases Nimoy as a director in this sequence?
Yeah, no, looking at this sequence, it felt very standard. I mean, other than kind of that lower angle placement of the cameras through some of it, just to kind of help build some of that tension. Otherwise, the one thing that I find that he integrates into the film and in the next one is there's a little more levity. I think both he and Harve Bennett were really excited to get some of their comedy into it. And boy, there are times where I really struggle with that because I'm like, ugh, I just don't think it works that well all the time. I mean, I don't mind some of the comedy integrated into these films, but when it works, and I just felt like there were things that happened in here that I was just like,
and that is something we're absolutely going to be talking about next week as well, because generally the stuff in this film, we mentioned the a little bit more of the frivolity that comes in that opening sequence, the caper. What's funny about that is the wit of the characters, right? Don't call me tiny. Those things work in character. They're brief and they're not slapstick. And there are other elements in this film and definitely in the next film that take me out of Star Trek because they verge on slapstick. And that is, I think that's a real challenge. And I think that's a great observation because I feel like it does hang on Bennett and Nimoy as trying to, shake up the tone a little bit. And it doesn't really work all the time for me either.
No, it was frustrating. And there are a lot of little things like that all through it. I was also frustrated that it's a cheap trick in not just this franchise. It happens in many films, but when they cut to the video screen footage of stuff, the fact that, they just use it's like they're watching, the Wrath of Khan.
Watching the last movie.
Yeah, and I mean we'll see this again next week. It's one of those frustrating things. It's like I wish that they had just maybe reshot the scene, but from a different angle to make it look And yeah, you do have that one moment. It just when Kirk and Spock's father are watching the Spock's death scene, and they're looking for that little clue, and then you see it in there, and I'm just like,
I always have this image that the first line after that sequence is, "That was a great movie." Like one of them needs to acknowledge that they were just watching the movie.
right, exactly.
Yeah, I really liked it. We didn't run down the rest of the cast that is in this sequence. Obviously, William Shatner, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan as Scooty, Walter Koenig, George Takei, Merritt Buttrick as David, and Robin Curtis as New Savick. And that was a real shame.
Yeah,
in my book, it's a real shame. No discredit to Robin Curtis. I'm sure she's a very nice person, but I think they set up something really solid with Kirstie Alley, who walked away from it herself.
Yeah, didn't want to be typecast.
Yeah,
didn't want to spend the rest of her life going to Star Trek conventions.
Yeah, I am sure sorry about that, because I thought she is Savick. She will always be Savick.
Yeah.
Stephen,
I actually liked Robin Curtis quite a bit as Savick, but it was just frustrating because I liked Kirstie Alley that much more.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Stephen Manley, we see in this scene as one of 7 Spocks. He plays Spock, age 17. And it's kind of funny to hear him tell the story now that he goes to conventions, or started going to conventions, years after. I don't know if he's still doing it, but he tells a story about how, he loves to take pictures with the ladies who want to have their picture taken with the Spock who does Ponfar. And he always holds up their fingers and rubs their hands like he does in the movie. And he says they always shake a little bit and then they smile. I don't know. What a weird experience that must be.
That just feels dirty.
And obviously, Christopher Lloyd as Commander Krug.
Yeah. I thought, looking at all the different people who did Spock, there were 5 actors who did it, including Leonard Nimoy. But there were 2 others. One was, I think, Nimoy's body double, and the other was Frank Welker, who is just a very famous voice actor. And one who's just been around forever as just kind of he's that guy who will do like random like bird calls and things in movies and in animated films, and always pops up as some interesting characters. But he did all of Spock's screaming. I thought that was great.
We talked about him recently. Well, maybe not recently, but I know we've talked about him in the last year.
Yes, we have.
When's the last time we mentioned Frank Welker's name? It's certainly not the first, won't be the last.
No, he's pretty brilliant. God, and now that you say that, I'm gonna have to look because I can't remember. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. We did talk about him. It was
recent, and it was another one of those surprising bits. And don't forget Frank Welker. He's probably screamed and did a bird call.
That's what he does.
Robert Fletcher does the costumes. Your comments on Star Trek civilian clothes?
I like some clothes. I generally liked stuff like what Kirk was wearing and stuff, but I did write a note. I'm like, what are Sulu and Chekhov wearing? Like, I just really couldn't figure out what they were trying to go for.
Sulu had some sort of a very strange cloak with weird flappy sleeves that weren't sewn up. I don't understand what those are, right? They're like wings, leather wings. Chekhov I didn't have a problem with, but Bones was wearing something with a leather breastplate under his jacket and a cravat. Which I guess is in character, but I always thought his was a very strange, very, very strange selection.
Yeah, it was weird, but I liked it. I still liked it, but it was one of those things where I'm like, I don't quite get what they're wearing.
Yeah, I like the uniform changes that they made for Scotty in particular. They just gave him a jacket. It didn't have the thing that went over his chest, that connected with the strap over on the right shoulder. It was just a jacket that snapped, and that felt very practical to me for an engineer. I liked that.
Yeah, no, it was nice. It was nice. And the Klingon outfits, too. I mean, like you mentioned with the bird of prey, it kind of became the iconic bird that we see kind of rippling through the things and Spock's, David's death and everything. But at the same time, we also get kind of the iconic Klingon look, because the TV show didn't have this Klingons looking this way. And so, and I guess we won't anymore, as we talked about on our weekend Patreon show. It's like, this is kind of the window of Klingons that we'll be looking into.
Yeah, the original Klingons were described in the scripts and the TV scripts as just, I think, what now would be described as horribly racist. They're Orientals or hard-faced. Is what they would write in the notes, and so there was nothing about the ridge on the forehead, and the first time we saw them was in episode "Errand of Mercy" in 1967, and so we end up meeting them there, but their skin is much more yellow or bronze, and the eyebrows were quite prominent, but we didn't have any of the teeth. They didn't have much of the language. It turns out it was James Doohan who actually suggested the gibberish that kind of got the language of Klingon started. And that's
back in the motion picture.
In the motion picture, right. And so there are just a lot of little pieces of the Klingons. And of course, Roddenberry says, we didn't. I wasn't intending for this to be a Russian thing, but Star Trek is a mirror of the culture that we have, and so that's very much what it felt like was the U.S.-Soviet relations at the kind of through the last half of the century, and so it ends up being sort of an interesting thing. But here, this film, just like The Bird of Prey, they sort of took over the Klingons as a significant foe in Star Trek, and pretty much gave Michael Dorn his career.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that whole idea of the Cold War and kind of the U.S. and the Russians, and kind of that was kind of the us and the Klingons, or the Federation and the Klingons, and that was definitely something that Harve Bennett was really tapping into, along with the Genesis project being kind of a mirror of nuclear, the kind of the Cold War we had going on at the time. Do you see that? Do you get a sense that was really kind of a little theme that they had going on in here? Because I understand it's there, and when he says it, I'm like, yeah, I can totally see it, but I don't know. I just didn't buy into it that much.
I didn't see it at the time, but I was a kid. Now, of course, sure. I see it, but I also have the benefit of a much more fleshed out Klingon relationship with Klingons from other films and The Next Generation, which, took that in a totally different direction. And so I feel like, I don't know if I can look at this film separate from history. But this film, if you step back to 1984, this film was, it was probably much more kind of prescient to people who were seeing it in their 20s and 30s at the time, and that certainly wasn't me. I was an idiot.
Yeah, well, no, and I get that the Genesis weapon was kind of a mirror of nuclear weapons at the time and kind of everything, but I don't know. I just feel like it wasn't developed in enough of a way where it was like really kind of felt like a nuclear weapon sort of thing. I feel like they tried to push that in the film, I guess, is what I'm saying, and I just don't think that they made it work that well.
But see, it's hard not to see it after you have had the benefit of seeing The Undiscovered Country.
Yeah.
Right? The Undiscovered Country is unrepentantly the story of the fall of the Soviet Union. This is the spiritual prequel in that context.
Right.
How did it do at award season?
It wasn't exactly an award movie, not something that you would say was really something that's going to get stuff. It had one win, which really doesn't count. It was like a win for the DVD collection when it was the big box set that came out. So that doesn't really count. 7 other nominations, 6 of which were the Saturn Awards, the Academy of Sci-Fi, Fantasy, and Horror Film nominations. It was nominated, it didn't win anything, but it was nominated there for Best Science Fiction Film, lost to The Terminator. Best Actor, William Shatner, lost to Jeff Bridges for Starman. This was kind of a weird one. Best Supporting Actress, Dame Judith Anderson, who comes in at the end as the Vulcan who is kind of performing this ritual to get Spock's Katra back. I didn't think that I understand that Dame Judith Anderson was like this famous actress and had retired for 14 years and came back to do this little part. But I was like, really? Best Supporting Actress? I mean, maybe they're just really thin that year. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Polly Holliday from Gremlins won that. Leonard Nimoy was nominated for Best Director. Joe Dante from Gremlins won. Robert Fletcher was nominated for his costumes, but Bob Ringwood won for Dune.
Rightfully so.
And Ralph Winter was nominated for special effects, but Chris Wallace won for Gremlins. So didn't really win much. But again, it wasn't the sort of thing that was gonna win much.
Yeah, right. Coming off of the success of Star Trek II, I would imagine that there would be some budgetary excitement, some box office excitement.
Certainly, as you mentioned, I mean, Star Trek II was quite the success. So Harvey and Co. were given $18 million to get the sequel going, which is $41.7 million in today's dollars. It was more than Wrath of Khan, but still nowhere near the ginormous budget that they had given to the first movie. The movie opened wide June 1st, 1984, the same weekend its predecessor opened just 2 years earlier. It opened the same weekend as Sergio Leone's vastly truncated version of Once Upon a Time in America, along with Streets of Fire with Willem Dafoe and Diane Lane. It opened at number 1 that weekend, pushing Indiana Jones and the Temple of Dune. I'm mixing up all my movies. Temple. That's a very interesting one. I want to see Indiana Jones on Arrakis. Anyway, push that one down to number 2. But then it was itself pushed down to number 4 in its second week when Ghostbusters and Gremlins both opened up. It never was able to get back up to the number 1 spot, but it did go on to make $76.5 million domestically and $10.5 million internationally, making a total gross in today's dollars of $201.8 million. Still wasn't as profitable as either of its predecessors, but it did make an adjusted profit per finished minute of $1.5 million. So there you go. Pretty successful still.
We named the worms Indiana.
In the Temple of Dune. I just love that. Oh, and I think Frank Welker, we were talking about him on our Hayao Miyazaki. Was he doing some of our English
That's right.
versions?
That must have been it. Yep, I'm sticking to it. Closing thoughts, Andy. We don't have the same sort of exuberance here that we did last week, but did you learn anything?
Well, it's, I learned that I don't hate watching this movie, but it is a frustrating watch because there are a lot of elements within it that just kind of just irritate me. So it's one of those where, I can look at it. I can see what they're doing with it. There are a lot of things I like. I don't know. I just get frustrated watching it. And I know there are elements that are going to frustrate me with number 4, but at least there's so much more to love in that film. So it's funny because this one, I think, I don't know when people started saying, oh, the odd numbered Star Trek movies are the kind of the boring ones or the less.
I think that was number 1, Andy.
Right out of the gate. And the even ones are the ones to watch. And it certainly seems to be going that way at this point. But then again, I really enjoyed the first one. So I don't know. This one is just it's a frustrating watch. I do feel now, having finally seen it, I feel like it's an important element to kind of watch in the continuity of everything, but it's not one that I don't know. It's just a frustrating one.
This is one of those movies that I have trouble with because when I look at it logically, I really have trouble with it. But it's also a Star Trek movie, and so I give it a pass because I enjoy watching the universe unfold. And even though I sometimes don't like what's going on screen, I like where they are. I like how they do it. So I give this one a bit of a pass when it comes to certain pieces of it. I have trouble with the mysticism of it. I have trouble with the with the logic of the Genesis planet. It's really ridiculous, but pretty much anytime you're going to float the Enterprise through space and that crushing blow of watching it, burn up it's a high point, and I enjoy the caper part of it. And so it's not my least favorite Star Trek film.
Right.
I said this was inconsequential, and I kind of feel like that's a good way to put it for me. It's a meh film. If I gave it's a Casablanca film. You know, you despise me, don't you? Well, if I gave you any thought, I probably would.
It's I feel like I'm kind of in your camp. There's something about it being in the Star Trek franchise that makes me still enjoy it. It doesn't make me still enjoy it. I enjoy that Star Trek element of it. I enjoy those high points, like you were saying. It's just there's a lot that's still frustrating me, and it mostly focuses around kind of Genesis and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think we should probably rank it.
Let's do it.
Head over to flickchart.com/thenextreel and you'll see our stack rankings of all of the films we've talked about on this very show. And then you can rank it yourself. If you swipe over in your show notes, you'll see a link to Star Trek on Flickchart, and it'll take you right to the film where you can add it to your list. Andy, where do we start?
All right, first up, we have Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, or The Road Warrior.
The Road Warrior.
Definitely The Road Warrior. Star Trek 3 or The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. Both very problematic films.
Yes, they are. I'd probably go Star Trek 3 because of the Star Trek factor.
I'm going to go Baron Munchausen.
All right.
It's a wimpy Baron Munchausen, but I'm still going to go with it.
You know. All right, let's entertain one another, Andy.
Let's.
1, 2, 3. Rock.
Scissors. Oh, broke my scissors.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek 3 or The Deer Hunter? I'm definitely the Deer Hunter.
Yeah.
Star Trek 3 or The Thin Man?
I'm probably The Thin Man.
Thin Man for me. Star Trek 3 or The Illusionist?
The Illusionist.
Honestly, I would go with Star Trek 3.
Okay, you can have it.
Okay. Star Trek 3 or Village of the Damned?
Star Trek 3.
I'm going to say Village of the Damned.
Okay. Here we go.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
Scissors. Paper.
Scissors.
Rock.
Oh.
Again, you are crushed.
Again. Buried. Star Trek 3 or Gallipoli?
I would put on Star Trek 3 first.
I would put Star Trek 3 on first, but I think Gallipoli is the better film. So I'm going to say Gallipoli. This is one of those weird flick chart times where I'm picking the one that's a better film because it's not high up enough for me to pick based on my
I'm going to stick with my pick. Here we go.
All right.
1, 2, 3. Paper.
Rock.
I'm feeling good. I'm
failing
good
today. Star Trek 3 or Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro? I'm going to say Lupin the Third.
Really?
No, I'm going to say Star Trek.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, that was gonna
I think
surprise
Lupin's
me.
the better film, but you got the Death of the Enterprise. So
yeah.
All right. Well, that puts Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, at number 215 out of 312 on our chart.
Wow.
There you go.
Wow. Yeah. So what does that do for your? I personally ranked it, I think, much higher. And I just re-ranked it today, and it ended up at 280 on my flick chart out of 996 or something. So that's a 72 for me. Where'd you go?
Mine is ranked at 950. I did not re-rank it. It's at 957 out of 3809. And that's it's about a 75% on my chart. So it's higher than yours, but I think, I don't know. I'd have to see what is around it, but I feel like it's probably dropped a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably true. What's this for your? How's this shoot for you for Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/thenextreel?
I think I'm a 3-star. There's problems with it, but there were things that I did like, and there were powerful moments. So I'm going to give it 3.
I am going to give it a 3 too, and that feels about right. In fact, that's if I go by what Flickchart says I should rank it on Letterboxd, then it should be a 3.5. But I'm going to stick with a 3. That feels good, and it's the, probably a little bit of New Savick, a lot of Genesis, and Christopher Lloyd's dental work. That's what's going to contribute to dropping it a half star.
But I liked it, so I'd still give it.
You're going to give it the heart. I'm going to give it the heart because it's Star Trek.
Yeah.
There you go. What's next?
We're going to end this little mini trilogy that ended up in the Star Trek universe. We're going to be going back in time to save some whales with Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. That's your favorite one.
It is my favorite one, Andy. I think we established that. Okay. All right. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be good. I'm gonna keep my mood high.
I'm excited for this one because this is one that I grew up with, and
if there is ever evidence that we were born at the wrong time, this might be it then.
Maybe. I guess we'll find out next week.
Can't wait to do that, Andy. You know, when the movie ends, our conversation begins. Amazon giveth, Andy.
As Amazon always doeth.
I had a hard time with the 1 stars. They weren't good. People were not really delivering their best efforts in the 1 stars this week.
That is correct. No.
You went high?
I went high. I went for a 5-star.
All right.
Rex Gillum has a wonderful little review. 5 stars. I bought this for a gift for a sick friend. He loves it.
That's
Thank
kind
you,
of
Rex.
a proxy review. That's another use of Amazon. I love it. Officer thinking.
I'm going to start doing that. Roger Ebert gave this 5 stars.
My friend Andy gave this a rock in rock, paper, scissors. Mine is, I went right down the middle, just as I did myself. It's a 3-star. Old William says, good movie, but lacking in storyline. Overall, good film. Didn't enjoy it as much as The Voyage Home or The Undiscovered Country. In this installment, Spock is back from the dead. Seems he was catapulted to the Genesis planet where he is starting over from a kid. Kind of crackers. And from now on, Andy, I'll be using crackers.
Vulcan crackers.
As a thing that I say. That'll be my thing. So thank you, William. Just crackers. Thanks, Amazon.
It's hard to believe that we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
You're telling me producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our originals page when shopping for books and movies we've covered.
Just visit thenextreel.com/originals. Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you and allow us to keep having these great conversations.
I was so excited for our big Star Trek film franchise series this season. All those movies adapted from Gene Roddenberry's original 1960s TV show.
As a huge fan, I know that you geeked out over analyzing the adaptations.
Absolutely. From the motion picture to the Kelvin timeline films, seeing the Enterprise cruise on the big screen was a dream come true.
Our list of source material isn't just all books and plays. We have the original series in our list of source material. You can rent the episodes to watch and enjoy, and support the show in the process.
For our Millennium Trilogy series, we covered films adapted from the original books that launched Lisbeth Salander, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire, and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest.
As much as I love Fincher's version, the original Swedish versions are the way to go. We also did our Die Hard series in season 7.
I can't believe Die Hard and Die Hard 2 were adaptations. 2 of the greatest action movies ever.
Well, one of them at least. The other is awfully fun, though. We revisited the classic Mary Poppins for our 1960s movie musical series. A spoonful of sugar always helps the medicine go down.
Old Boy was intense for our Park Chan-wook Vengeance trilogy. And East of Eden and Giant were highlights of our James Dean series.
And a fun time travel mind bender with Predestination to cap things off.
Find all the books behind these adaptations and more at thenextreel.com/originals.
Dive into the source material for your favorite movies. Check it out today, thenextreel.com/originals.